The other day, I was grabbing coffee with a friend who's been navigating the modern dating scene for years. He showed me something on his phone that honestly made my skin crawl at first. It wasn't a dating app, it was a spreadsheet linked to an API. He had integrated an AI tool that wasn't just helping him swipe, it was scanning chat logs, analyzing the syntax of his matches, and assigning them what he called a stability score. He pointed at one profile and said, "See this person." The AI flagged them for a short-term mating strategy based on their response latency and vocabulary choice. Saved me 3 weeks of wasted effort. He spoke about his love life the way a logistics manager talks about a supply chain. There was no mention of sparks or destiny. Instead, he was obsessed with value filtering and mitigating risk. It felt cold, almost clinical, until I realized he wasn't an outlier. According to the latest data from the Kinsey Institute, the use of AI tools for dating has surged by a staggering 333% in just the last 2 years. At first glance, it looks like we've finally lost our humanity to the machines, that we've turned the search for a soulmate into a data entry job. But as I watched him tune his external cognitive module, I realized something far more unsettling. This isn't a tech trend at all. It's a desperate survival tactic. We are currently witnessing the greatest evolutionary mismatch in human history. Our brains were forged in the small band tribes of the savannah, designed to choose between maybe a dozen potential mates in a lifetime. Now we are drowning in a digital sea of near infinite choice. When you look under the hood of this algorithmic romance, you find that we aren't using AI to change what we want. We are using it as a high-tech shield to protect instincts that are millions of years old. We are letting the silicon take over the screening, not because we've stopped being human, but because our biological hardware can no longer keep up with the hunt. That story, it just perfectly frames what we're diving into today. This concept of evolutionary mismatch, specifically in the high-stakes, hyper-competitive world of modern dating. We're going to unpack exactly why our brains are struggling so much with the digital dating world and how this one concept explains, well, almost everything. From burnout and dissatisfaction to, why people strategically lie on their profiles.
It really is the essential framework. Without it, so many modern behaviors, especially around mating, just seem confusing or even self-defeating. So maybe we should start by just defining this core idea, rigorously. Evolutionary mismatch.
Let's do it. What's the textbook definition?
Well, the basic idea is that the sophisticated tools we have in our heads, our psychological adaptations, all those cognitive shortcuts and decision-making programs, they evolved to be incredibly efficient. But efficient in a very specific ancient setting, what we call the environment of evolutionary adaptiveness, or EEA.
The EEA. So this is like the ancestral environment where our brains were forged.
Exactly. You can think of the mind as a collection of specialized apps, each one crafted by natural selection to solve a recurring problem our ancestors faced: finding food, avoiding predators, and, of course, choosing a mate.
So we've got this, it's a millions of years old operating system, right? And it's built for a totally different world.
Precisely. And that's where the mismatch. That's where it really kicks in. Mismatch happens when the inputs to these highly specialized mechanisms are completely outside the range they evolved to handle.
The data set is wrong.
The data set is wrong. The modern world is just so radically different from the EEA that the output from our evolved psychology often seems, well, dysfunctional, irrational, or, as you said, maladaptive.
So the mechanism isn't broken, it's just getting signals it was never designed to process.
The mechanism is working perfectly. It's just running on a corrupted data set. And to really grasp the modern crisis, you have to anchor yourself in the baseline, the ancestral mating environment.
What did that actually look like?
Think small, interdependent groups, foragers, small-scale farming societies. The crucial constraint here was size.
Right.
Your pool of potential mates was just tiny. You might realistically encounter only a few dozen individuals over your entire fertile life who are, available as partners.
A dozen choices. Maybe. Over a whole lifetime. That's it.
That's it. A selection pressure designed for scarcity. It means every choice was incredibly high stakes, but the cognitive load, the mental effort was manageable.
And everyone knew everyone.
Exactly. That scarcity meant high local accountability. You couldn't just, discard a bad match and move to the next town. You had to live with your choices, and your reputation was everything.
Which is probably why mate choice wasn't this totally solo decision we see today.
Not at all. It was often heavily influenced by what we call third-party preferences. Your kin, your family, the whole group. They had a vested, adaptive interest in your match being stable and productive.
Because if my sister chooses a partner who's unreliable, That failure affects a resource pool for my kids too.
The stakes were collective. It's such a stark contrast with today, where mate choice is seen as this hyper-individualistic, autonomous act, and the pool feels infinite.
And you're saying this mismatch framework, it applies to more than just dating, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's foundational to the field of evolutionary medicine. Yeah. I mean, think about the most obvious physical examples. Obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease.
Our craving for sugar and fat.
Right. Those cravings come from adaptations to efficiently store every single calorie in an environment that was defined by periodic famine. That mechanism saved our ancestors. But now, in a world of constant calorie-dense food, it leads to chronic illness.
It's an evolutionary time bomb. The successful strategy of yesterday becomes the pathology of today.
Well, I see this mirrored in psychiatric examples, too. There's fascinating research linking schizophrenia vulnerability to living in less integrated urban social groups.
How does that work?
Our ancestors lived in these deeply integrated, cohesive groups. Social coherence was paramount for survival. Modern urban life often means profound social segmentation, relative isolation. And that might trigger or amplify certain psychological vulnerabilities that were latent in the EEA.
And what about something like ADHD?
ADHD is often discussed as a classic behavioral mismatch. Our attention mechanisms, our drive for mobility, they evolved for dynamic, constantly changing environments where kids were exploring, playing, moving.
Not sitting at a desk for 8 hours.
Exactly. The modern classroom, by demanding excessive stillness and long periods of focused, non-dynamic attention, creates an input condition that just doesn't match the design specs of a young human's brain. And the result is what we label a disorder.
That's a really powerful way to reframe it. Okay, so let's bring this focus back to mating. When researchers study modern dating, you mentioned that they use a specific acronym to describe just how far their subjects are from that ancestral baseline.
Yes. The term is strangely weird. It's a modification of the older acronym WEIRD, which stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic. This one is tailored to highlight the specific factors that warp modern mating.
Okay, let's unpack it. Strangely weird. What's the S?
S is for social media. Ancestrally, you assess someone's status through direct observation, their skills, their reputation.
Things you could actually see.
Right. Now, social media provides this curated, amplified, and often, deceptive fire hose of information about status and desirability. It completely distorts how you see others, and maybe more importantly, how you see yourself.
Okay, S is social media. T.
T stands for temporary relationships. The high mobility of modern life means relationships, especially for young adults, are often serial. They're not seen as these long-term, kin-supported bonds.
And R is for?
Relocatable. People can and do move easily for school, for work. This drastically increases the size of the mating pool, but it also completely craters that local social accountability we talked about.
You can just reinvent yourself in a new city. A is for autonomy and mate choice, which seems obvious. The choice is almost entirely up to the individual now.
Which, from an evolutionary perspective, eliminates one of the most powerful ancient filters for ensuring long-term stability and resource flow for kids.
Okay, so we have STRA. What's N? That one's less obvious.
N is for nulliparous. It's a technical term that just means the people being studied usually haven't had children yet.
And why does that matter?
Because ancestrally, mating mechanisms were shaped by the immediate real costs of having offspring. When you study people who don't have those immediate parental investment costs, you risk capturing mating strategies that are detached from the ultimate long-term fitness consequences.
It's like studying financial planning by only talking to people who've never had a bill.
That's a great analogy. Next is G for group segmentation.
What do you mean by that?
Unlike a single cohesive tribe, modern life is fragmented. You have your work friends, your gym friends, your online community. Your reputation cues, a key ancestral tool, are scattered across these different unconnected contexts.
That's a huge point. In a small tribe, everyone knew your whole story. Now, you can be a rock star in one social segment and a complete unknown in another. There's no unified reputation.
None. And then we have E for educational setting and Y for young adults. These groups spend years in these very specific environments, like universities, often with skewed sex ratios and deferred financial independence. This leads to mating behaviors that are, as we'll get into, evolutionarily more adolescent than adult.
So, strangely weird, but you said one letter in there is the real engine of this whole crisis.
Yes, the letter L. Lots of options. This is, without exaggeration, the most profound input mismatch in the history of our species. The sheer overwhelming abundance of choice delivered 247 through dating platforms. It amplifies the input to our mating psychology at an exponentially unparalleled level.
And that sets the stage perfectly for the cognitive collapse I saw with my friend. The spreadsheet, the AI. When you go from assessing a dozen people in a lifetime to hundreds in an hour, I mean, what is actually crashing inside our brains? Let's really dig into that cognitive overload problem. Ancestrally, assessing those dozen or so mates was a deep process. It took time, observation, social feedback. Now, the dating app just throws this infinite scroll of low-resolution data at you.
Our evolved decision-making architecture, it just has a limited capacity. It's like a computer's RAM. When you open too many tags, the system slows down and crashes.
And you start making bad decisions.
Or no decisions at all. When faced with too many choices, the cognitive mechanisms that are designed for deep assessment, they start to default to shallow heuristics. You swipe based on one photo, one line in a bio.
So you're not optimizing, you're just surviving the scroll.
Exactly. It leads to what psychologists call satisficing instead of maximizing.
Yeah.
You don't look for the best possible mate because that's an impossible task in this environment. You just settle for the first option that meets a bare minimum threshold. Or you get decision paralysis and choose no one.
And here's the crazy part.
Yeah.
You're saying even if a profile is for someone 1,000 miles away, my brain still lights up.
Yes. This is where the activation of those cues becomes so problematic. The cue itself, the image, the status symbols in the bio, it still triggers the evolved psychological mechanisms for mate assessment.
Wow.
Those mechanisms, they don't have a filter for geographical distance or practical feasibility. They just register high-quality potential mate detected, and the whole cascade starts.
So we are constantly activating these ancient emotional and motivational circuits for outcomes that are statistically almost zero.
Yeah.
That just sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting.
Right.
And it points directly to the pervasive relationship dissatisfaction we see everywhere.
Explain that link. Why does more choice lead to less happiness with the choice you've made?
It's a classic symptom of mismatch. We all possess a psychological adaptation that is designed to constantly monitor the environment for better alternatives.
That sounds a little cynical.
It's not cynical, it's adaptive. In the ancestral environment, if a slightly higher quality mate someone healthier, a better provider became available in your small band, switching partners could dramatically increase your reproductive fitness. It was a powerful motivator to optimize your outcome.
But that optimization mechanism was designed for a world where a better alternative might show up once every 5 years.
Exactly. But now, when that mechanism is constantly fed thousands of seemingly better options, the idealized profiles online, it never ever turns off.
So your brain is getting a constant nagging signal that you could do better, even if you're in a great relationship.
Precisely. The digital world provides this nonstop barrage of input saying a potentially better option exists. And that leads to this chronic dissatisfaction, this difficulty maintaining a pair bond, even when the relationship you're in is objectively good. The brain is getting a constant maladaptive signal to initiate mate switching.
Because the environment is artificially inflating the perceived availability of alternatives.
The mechanism is functioning exactly as designed. It's tracking alternatives. But the output in the modern world is disastrous. It leads to perpetual searching and relational instability.
And this dissatisfaction is then made even worse by the social media and self-presentation mismatch. We're not just dealing with the quantity, but the quality of the information is all skewed.
Right. These digital platforms become these arenas for status tracking, but the rules are all distorted. You're exposed to these highly curated, idealized, strategically presented versions of potential mates.
The highlight reel.
The constant highlight reel. The perfect travel photos, the high-value friends, the conspicuous consumption. And this feeds directly into the tracking of your own self-perceived mate value, or SPMV.
How I rate myself in the mating market.
Yes. Ancestrally, your SPMV was based on tangible, real-world feedback. Your reputation, your skills, how people in your group treated you.
That now
your SBMV is heavily influenced by how you compare your own messy reality to the curated digital perfection of both potential partners and, just as importantly, your competitors.
So if I feel like my own value is low because I'm comparing my average Tuesday to someone's Instagram vacation, that actually changes how I date.
It directly influences your mating strategy. The data is pretty clear on this. Men who score higher in self-perceived mate value also score higher on measures of sociosexuality.
Yeah.
They're more inclined to pursue short-term casual strategies.
And if your self-perceived value is low,
A low SPMV can lead to less selective, maybe more desperate strategies, or very often profound anxiety and just complete withdrawal from the mating market. It feels too daunting.
So the distortion of reality on social media doesn't just make us unhappy. It actually pushes people into mating strategies that might not even align with what they say they want, like a long-term relationship.
And the indirect effects on well-being are huge. We know that extensive social media use is consistently linked to higher rates of anxiety, depression, lower self-esteem. And a lot of that is driven by this social comparison process. When you're operating from that negative psychological state, it inevitably poisons your ability to form stable, trusting relationships.
It's a vicious cycle. The mismatch creates cognitive distress, which then undermines the very connections we're seeking.
Right. And as if all that wasn't enough, we still have the impoverished queue problem. Even if the information wasn't curated and filtered, it's still fundamentally incomplete.
What do you mean by that?
Think about what we're missing when we look at a profile. Ancestral assessment was holistic. It was 360 degrees, body language, scent including chemical cues like pheromones.
You can't smell a profile.
You can't smell a profile. You're missing voice quality, immediate emotional responses, reputation from kin. Online, we're relying on a handful of declarative statements and a few highly selected, often manipulated photographs.
The rich, hard-to-fake cues are gone.
They're almost entirely absent. We're left with information that is the result of strategic self-presentation. And this raises a really crucial question for the field.
Which is?
Do our mate assessment adaptations recognize this online information as being weak and unreliable? Or, because there's an information vacuum, are they forced to give this flimsy digital data undue weight, simply because it's the only information available?
That feels like a critical design flaw in the entire system. We're forced to judge a complex human being using a few unreliable data points, which must just escalate the whole strategic arms race of deception.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And the data on profile deception shows that people have figured out exactly which lies give them the biggest evolutionary advantage.
Okay, so let's unpack that arms race. Let's use the framework of parental investment theory, or PIT. This seems absolutely essential to understanding why people lie in the specific ways they do.
It's the bedrock, really. Robert Triver's theory is one of the cornerstones of modern evolutionary psychology.
Give us the quick version.
PIT predicts that the sex that invests more heavily in offspring, in terms of time, energy, biological cost, will be the more selective sex when it comes to choosing a mate.
And the less invested sex will compete more for access.
Precisely. In humans, that obligate higher investment falls on women. Gestation, childbirth, lactation. These are massive biological costs.
So women are the choosier sex.
Evolutionarily speaking, yes. And that has crafted these very predictable gendered mate preferences over millions of years. Women are primarily scanning for cues that indicate a man's ability and willingness to provide resources and commitment.
High parental investment.
Exactly. Men, on the other hand, are primarily scanning for cues of youth and physical attractiveness, which are historical proxies for reproductive capacity and immediate fertility.
So when we move to the dating app, the profile is basically an advertisement. And people are strategically exaggerating the exact traits that the opposite sex has been wired to look for.
That is precisely what the research finds. There was a fascinating study where they brought people into a lab, measured their actual height, weight, and age, and then compared it to what was on their online dating profiles.
And the results.
The study found that deception is frequent, but it's also quite subtle. A staggering 81% of participants lied about at least one of those three characteristics.
81%. That's almost everyone. But you said the lies are subtle. If it's just a little bit, does it really matter?
It matters for signaling, but the subtlety is the key. The average magnitude of the lie was small, about 2% of actual height, 5.5% of weight, and just 1.4% of age.
So just enough to round up, basically.
Exactly. It suggests people want to optimize their profile, but they know that a blatant, huge lie will be immediately exposed the second they meet in person.
And the deception followed the predictions from parental investment theory.
Perfectly. The lies were systematically gendered. Men lied more about the characteristic valued by women. Height. Height is a known proxy for status and resource control. On average, they exaggerated their height by over half an inch.
And women?
Women focused their deception on the characteristic valued by men. Weight. They lied about weight to minimize any deviation from the idealized cues of youth and fertility.
So it's not just general dishonesty. It's highly strategic, adaptive signaling, just in a new medium.
And that hypothesis is reinforced by another finding. The extent of lying about, say, height was statistically independent of lying about weight.
Meaning if you lied about one, you weren't necessarily more likely to lie about the other.
Correct. which strongly implies that people aren't just generally honest or dishonest. They are making a very specific calculation about which lie gives them the highest return on investment in the mating market based on their gender.
They're putting their limited lying budget where it will count the most.
You could absolutely put it that way. And this brings us to a really important concept called warranting.
Warranting.
Warranting. Digital deception isn't totally unconstrained. It's held in check by the anticipation of a future in-person meeting. Warranting is the degree to which an online claim is supported by tangible evidence that's hard to fake. It's what connects the digital self to the offline, physical self.
So this is why people are more honest about certain things.
Yes. This is why the study found that participants were most accurate about the information that is easily verified and absolutely critical for long-term commitment. Their relationship information.
Marital status if they have kids.
Right. Lying about being single when you're married is a high-stakes, easily exposed lie that would be disastrous. The mechanisms guiding strategic deception are constrained by that reality.
And the profile photograph itself must be the biggest warrant of all. It grounds the whole thing in physical reality.
It's a huge warrant, and studies confirm this. Profiles that had photographs showed much greater accuracy in reporting key relational info than text-only profiles did. The visual link creates accountability that tempers the digital lies.
So there are limits to the lie.
There are. And one last interesting point on that. The study found that the people who deviated most from the average, very short men, for example, or very heavy women, were the ones who exaggerated those traits the most.
So the lie is used to close the gap.
It's a corrective measure, an attempt to digitally pull themselves closer to the perceived physical norm that evolved preferences demand. The whole thing is this incredibly complex, data-driven arms race of strategic exaggeration, all held in check by the simple fact that eventually you have to meet.
That's the perfect transition. So we've established the human solution to this overwhelming competitive environment is strategic deception. But my friend's spreadsheet, the AI scoring, that 333% surge in automated filtering suggests we're now turning to technology for the solution. The algorithm is stepping in where the human brain is failing. So let's talk about this idea of AI as an external cognitive module. Is that really what's happening?
I think that's exactly what's happening. The reason for this dramatic surge in tech filtering is because the massive information flow has basically rendered our evolved psychological mechanisms obsolete for the task of initial screening.
The hardware can't run the software anymore.
The human brain just cannot perform effective cognitive resource allocation when it's presented with unlimited options and strategically distorted data. So using AI tools to assign a stability score, to analyze chat logs for red flags, to optimize swiping, it's all fundamentally an attempt to offload that unsustainable cognitive burden.
The AI becomes a prosthetic, a filter.
It's a prosthetic filter designed to cut through the noise and get the signal intensity back down to a manageable level. This whole approach is an attempt to protect our ancient psychological instincts that drive for a stable, high-quality, long-term partner, which were optimized for scarcity.
So my friend's spreadsheet, it's not about being cold or clinical. It's about using technology to digitally recreate the constraints of the ancestral environment.
That's a fantastic way to put it. The AI takes the engineered abundance of the dating app and forces it back into a framework of scarcity. It helps the user get back towards maximizing, finding the best fit, rather than just satisficing or settling.
That suggests a way forward then. If the problem is overwhelming choice, the solution is to intentionally design platforms for scarcity.
That is the direct prediction from the mismatch perspective. A dating app that was designed to aggressively limit potential matches, maybe it only gives you 2 or 3 highly vetted options per week.
Or one that forces you to meet in person quickly to get those rich nonverbal cues.
Yes. Theoretically, those platforms should lead to much better long-term outcomes, less anxiety, and higher user satisfaction.
As opposed to the current model.
The current model, which prioritizes metrics like engagement time and total swipes, is inadvertently just amplifying the chronic dissatisfaction we talked about. The design shift has to be from maximizing algorithmic reach to minimizing cognitive burden.
We're talking about redesigning the mating game itself. And if we're talking about design, we have to look at the mathematical architecture of these systems. Let's get into the mathematics of mating structure, specifically the Gale-Shapley algorithm. You said this reveals some hidden power dynamics.
It does. The Gale-Shapley algorithm is a classic solution to what's known as the stable marriage problem.
The stable marriage problem.
Right. It's used in all sorts of complex matching scenarios, like matching medical students to residency programs, and implicitly in digital dating. It's a way to find a stable pairing where no two people who aren't paired would both prefer each other over their current partners.
Okay, so it finds a state where no one has an incentive to cheat the system.
Exactly. But here's the crucial mathematical insight. Stability does not equal fairness or equal optimization. The algorithm proves that the proposer, the party that initiates the pairing process, always secures an optimal outcome relative to their own preference list.
And the selector, the one who receives the proposals.
The selector gets an acceptable, stable outcome, but not necessarily their optimal one.
Wait, break that down. Why is the proposer always at an advantage?
It comes down to who controls the search. In the algorithm, the proposers get to test their preference lists from the top down. They go to their number one choice. If rejected, they go to number two, and so on. They exhaust their best options first.
And the selector is just reacting.
The selector is reactive. They can only improve their outcome if a better option proposes to them. They can't proactively seek out their number one choice.
So if you translate this to a dating app where, say, one sex is dominant in sending the first message.
If one sex acts as the proposers and the other as the selectors, the initiating sex is mathematically set up to benefit more in securing their preferred matches.
Wow.
This structural asymmetry, it's baked into the math. The social norms of the platform who proposes dictates who benefits most in achieving their optimal match.
So even if the algorithm finds a stable match, the proposers get their top pick from who's available, while selectors are just picking the best of who approach them. That is a fundamental power dynamic encoded in the code itself.
It is. And it's another layer to this whole mismatch problem. And we have to view all of this within the context of how much the life course of young adults has changed.
Yeah.
We need to talk about the mismatch in youth and mating timing.
What do you mean by that?
The modern Western life trajectory is just completely novel, evolutionarily speaking. Ancestrally, a 20-year-old was a fully integrated adult member of the community. Often they already had children. They had essential survival skills.
And crucially, monarch, the onset of female fertility, happened much later.
Much later, often in the late teens when an individual was much closer to social and cognitive maturity.
And today, monarch is often around 11 or 12, but financial and social independence is delayed until the late 20s or even 30s.
And that is the critical timing mismatch. Modern young adults are in this extended period where they are reproductively capable very early, but they're still financially dependent, still building skills, and they lack the social standing and resources needed for high parental investment.
It's a huge cognitive dissonance. Your body is ready for reproduction, but your life is not.
And that means that the mating behavior we see in, say, college students might not reflect the adaptive strategies of ancestral 20-year-olds at all.
What does it reflect then?
It might be closer to the mating behaviors of ancestral adolescents, behaviors that involve more risk-taking, more short-term exploration, because the actual real costs of reproduction raising a child are socially and financially deferred.
So that increases the potential cost today, like unintended pregnancy, without the ancestral benefits of, say, pre-menarcheal exploration when reproduction wasn't even on the table. It makes modern casual sex a much higher stakes game than our biology is prepared for.
And we also see this mismatch in the composition of the mating pool itself, especially in educational settings like universities.
The sex ratios are skewed.
Very skewed. Many undergraduate populations are heavily female biased. And that shift in the operational sex ratio, the ratio of available men to women, has predictable consequences.
Let me guess. It shifts the culture towards short-term mating.
Theory predicts it, and the data largely supports it. When women significantly outnumber men in a local mating pool, you tend to see a rise in things like hookup culture or casual arrangements. This happens because the abundant sex, women in this case, have to compete more fiercely for the limited resource, men, and that often relaxes the male requirement for commitment and resource provisioning.
So this mismatch framework, it really is the master key. It unlocks why the modern dating world feels so confusing. The dissatisfaction, the deception, the desperate turn to AI. It's not a moral failing.
It's not a moral failing. It's not a sign we've given up on love. These are all predictable functional outputs of ancient psychological machinery that is struggling to process unprecedented, confusing, high-intensity signals from our modern environment.
Our mating adaptations are still trying to do their job.
They are still operating to maximize fitness and secure good partners. But the digital signal is so distorted and overwhelming that the adaptive behavior of the past becomes the source of profound anxiety and instability today. That sheer abundance of choice, that lots of options, remains the defining evolutionary bottleneck in the modern search for a partner.
What this deep dive really shows is that the clinical, data-driven approach to dating, the spreadsheets, the AI filters, the stability scores, it isn't a sign that we've successfully replaced love with logistics. It is, in fact, an urgent technological reaction to a profound biological crisis. The cognitive inability of the human brain, forged in conditions of scarcity, to process infinite mate choice. We didn't evolve for a global marketplace of partners. We evolved for a small camp where accountability was instant and choices were few. By employing sophisticated filters and algorithms, we are essentially trying to digitally recreate the critical constraints of the savannah, using silicon to enforce the small numbers and high warranting our ancestors knew. And we're doing it not because we've given up on love, but because our millions of years old instincts demand protection from the information age. Our next great challenge won't just be adapting the technology, but learning how to live with the fact that our hyper-connected, autonomous modern lives are fundamentally at war with the ancient rules of attraction.